play, there's eros, there's philos, and just working and doing what we love to do, right? And engaging the art, engaging the work, the academic work, or whatever it is we do. And I really like this idea, yesterday Callaloo said something about how the genomic story in Black bodies, our sort of biological need to read and write and tell our stories. And I sort of like to think about sort of the way this manifests scientifically, but how it also trumps science. So there's this kind of, it's still a weird movement, and I'm going to put it out there, but this whole idea of literary Darwinism, this sort of idea that we inherit many of predispositions we deem to be cultural through our genes. Like, it's almost like narrative is encoded in our DNA, and I find that really fascinating, and I believe it because you tell any 5-year-old, "Come here, I'm gonna tell you a story," and they run to you, right? We as children, we all love stories. Why do we love stories? Why do we love song? And for me, there is a kind of biological love of pattern, right? Stories have pattern, and we learn through patterns. It's the first thing kids do is try to figure out what the patterns are. So I'm really fascinated by this concept, how stories make us more adaptive and capable of passing on our own genes. This is sort of the kind of work we're doing, documenting and moving forward with our work. All right, so in my case, in terms of the kind of work I'm doing, the kind of work I see Neddy doing and Greg, and so many people who are interested in science fiction, I love, Greg, what you said in that, by the way, this is such an amazing interview in the last issue of Callaloo. The idea that science fiction is the dialectic between the dystopic and the utopic. What do we want? Where are we in this sort of gradient? What do we imagine for ourselves, for our futures? And you also talked about, Greg, the existential Black condition is very future-leaning. And it's true, people, I think Diaz says, yeah, of course we're futuristic. I mean, you go from, let's say you're an immigrant, you go from, living conditions where you might not have access to potable water, and then all of a sudden you're on an airplane, and you're in New York City, and you have a TV, and your toilet flushes. I mean, that's time travel. And he talks a lot about the fact that we are not strangers to this idea of the future in science fiction. So I really want to explore that as a writer. I do want to think about the future, just the way I was raised as a child of immigrants, el futuro. My father was always saying, el futuro, la educación es el futuro. So that we're always thinking about the future. It's never about now. It's like saving, constantly saving. And I was like, when is the future gonna come? When is it gonna come? And then all of a sudden I'm like 40. So yes, we are future thinking. So I wanted, Maza, last year, we did the translations panel. We were talking about how do we write love in a world that sort of rewards Black pain, right? So the New Yorker will publish our pain. We will be awarded prizes if we write blood and how fucked up we are as our condition, right? So that's what I'm trying to tackle in my fiction. Like, how do I write light? How do I write towards light? If love is light, right? And I like to think of love as light. I think J.T. Jenkins actually said it in the first panel. Love is the oldest technology. There's electricity in love. There's light in love. When you're in love, I mean, after sex, the next day you have like your eyes are like shooting out. There's light. And when we talk about love, there's been a lot of talk of the eye, right? The ocular. We talk about, I think Jerima said something about his father loving his mother with his third eye, right? And, okay, I can't sing. I think I'm the only Dominican who can't sing, but let them know your eyes are wide open, right? Let them know your eye is wide open. So that's led me, like in my own work, to really think anatomically about the eye itself, like anatomically, like what is the eye? It's an organ that lets in and sort of processes light, how we, what we see. And I like to think of the eye not as sort of the evil eye, and we talk a lot about, ahogamiento, evil eye, but it is a powerful organ. In fact, it confused Darwin with his theory of, I think the creationists argue that that was the one organ that stumped his theory of evolution. Of course, Darwin kind of found his way out of it. If you read further, you realize he kind of works his way out of it. But for Darwin, the mystery of the eye evolution had to do, he confessed that it was absurd to propose that the human eye evolved through spontaneous mutation and natural selection. It's such a complex organ. So we have not yet, within medicine, figured out how to transplant a complete eye. We can do corneal transplant, but not the whole eye. And so that's what I'm trying to imagine in my fiction. What if we can do that? Can we see through each other's eyes? Should we be able to make this transfer? I don't know how to do this because I don't have a medical degree, but I am using a Dr. Ramon Castroviejo, who was the one who invented or worked on a surgical technique for corneal transplant. And we'll see. That's what fiction is. Fiction allows you to sort of imagine and play with what the impossible, make possible the impossible. So I want to continue this sort of eye talk. I know by the time I'm done you'll be blinking and your eyes will be all watery, but so coming back to Nevi's Ifunanya, again, love, to look in the eye. This is when and I love being in Ethiopia. I kept telling Dagmawi and Maza, oh my God, everyone has biblical eyes here. You know Ethiopians by their eyes. You just know, you're like that. And there's something to that. The fact that that's sort of the cradle of humanity, I don't know, that was just, I had a whole bunch of, ocular situations in Ethiopia. And then yesterday I was talking to Sarah Lewis, and she was talking about this concept of ocular fire, which I Googled it afterwards, I still couldn't find it. So I'm gonna figure out what this ocular fire is. But it's this idea that there was, in the past, the thought that the eye emitted light. And in fact, if you look at some old, some of the Greek drawings or drawings, and you always see a sort of beam coming out of the eye. And then, of course, modern science tells us that really it's the other way around. The flux of light is this way. And so what Sarah was talking about, this idea about ocular fire, is the bridge we connect, the sort of light bridge we connect when we process an object, whatever it is we're seeing, right? That there is a connection, a bridge. So there's some things that I won't see, but there are things I'm going to see, right? But depending on what my eye structure or sort of visual, what's going on with my own sight. And so I'm always asking people, so what's your sight? Like, what's your vision? The difference between sight and vision, right? What you can see with the eye and what you can see with your whole body is very different. So I talk to people I've talked to some of my colleagues, one of them who didn't get into the military because he was deemed colorblind. And he's from the border, he's Chicano, and he argues that he is not colorblind because he is able to perceive shades of red that are beyond what anyone else can see, because he says sight is cultural, the idea of vision is cultural. Yeah, he may not be able to make out the gradient of blues and greens, but he is very versed in reds, and he will show you every gradation of red that we might be blind to. So that's really fascinating to me, and I really I'm trying to figure out how to bring it down in fiction. How do I bring all these ideas to the ground? And so, I'm just going to read a quick piece, just so you get an idea of how I'm trying to do this with the eye thing, and then I'll be done. So, am I good on time? Great. Okay. I want a little paper, a little spitball. All right, so this guy, his name is Milton. And it's just really quick, but I just want you to get an idea of a voice. I'm sort of trying to write how he sees, which he has fly vision. He sees the way a fly does or an insect. So if I see that way, if I see a mosaic, how does that affect my speech? I really think that how we see is going to somehow transfer into our tongue somehow. So he's fucked up in two ways. He has fly vision and his heart is on the right side. and he's trying to become a pilot, but he can't. So I'm going to read you a scene where he goes to the military processing, entrance processing station, and then after that, he's all, messed up. So he goes to the shooting range to hang out with his friend, and they talk about their impediment. And this was published in Callaloo, the summer of 2007. Compound vision is a disqualifying condition for flying duty classes 11A, 22F, 2S3. I have compounded vision. Having the vision of a flight disqualifies me from flying. I asked this to the military entrance processing station people. They did not appreciate my ironness. MEPS people, they've got too much solder in their ears for the kinds of brags I gave them. I was disqualified from flying duty classes 11A, 22F, 2S3. Dextrocardia is a disqualifying condition for flying duty classes 11A, 22F, 2S3. I have it, dextrocardia. Having my heart beat on the right disqualifies me from patriotic duty. I asked this to the MEPS doctor when he stuck a stethoscope over my left nipple and just heard lung. He did not appreciate my deep passion fruit for combat. He just frowned at my beater on my right and at the brags I gave him. He took off his stethoscope. He said to forget about much even trying to scout a medical waiver. It's especially hard to abstain from aviation duty. The BAPS term disqualified me from flying duty classes 11A, 22F, 2S3. Pistola was already shooting him up at the gallery. What taking me so long? How'd it go at the MEPS, he said. Oh, tough as Kuntao tough, I yelled over his bullet marks. Too bad, he yelled. He put more lead onto paper. Too bad indeed. Pistola understood me. A bum I had disqualified him for army duty. I watched him Swiss cheese another paper man. He was the better shot. To me, those eyes looked like chessing boards. I shot anyway how. Stop shooting to the right, Guerrero. The hearts are on the left, he said. I stopped shooting altogether now. It was easier to watch Pistola kill off a nation-state of papermen. He was getting on board with paper. I was too. In fact, running out of bullet points meant I was plenty thirsty. Time to shoot the breeze, piss, I told him. We went to the Athena pub next to the door of the gallery. Beers there were cheap and warm, but Pistola liked the gun decorum there. He leaned, oh hush. Ronnie Velasquez can forge us med waivers. That shook up stuff in my mind box. Tricky for air duty, I said. I don't know about that. That shook up stuff in Pistola's mind box. It'll be easier for you. You're a secret cripple. No one can see your busted heart and vision, and if you just shut up, they won't hear you spit those sixers either. My cripple, now that's a different story. Never any pity in the brags about his bum eye. Pistola drank good and plenty to keep me from saying anything much. So anyway, Ronnie's uneven has the next, he said. He's a good guy. I've got love for him. It's quite possible that Pistola may fester love for people. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. So our final respondent I'm going to introduce today is Scott Heath, an assistant professor in the Department of English at Georgia State. His book, Head Theory, Hip-Hop Discourse and Black-Faced Culture, under contract with Oxford, explicates the ways in which our arguments about hip-hop text have shifted in the last decade, concurrent with recent developments in the technologies of race. Heath guest edited Callaloo's widely acclaimed special issue on hip-hop music and culture. He has since reimagined the project as Tex and Burners, Studies in Contemporary Hip-Hop Design, a collection of essays to be included in Charles Rawls' Callaloo's Diaspora series at Johns Hopkins University Press. Professor Heath's going to transition us into some Q&A action. Thank you.
Did you say enliven or add color to it?
Enliven.
I've just been taking a few notes, a few remarks. How are you guys doing? Maybe I'll bring us back a bit to the conference theme here. I've just been thinking about love, and thinking that love in a diasporic context seems to me is always a speculative venture. It's always about measuring possibility, right? Making all of us sort of investment speculators ourselves. We're asking where or where not to deposit this emotional and psychic energy. The speculative text, whether it's fictive or not, seems to be largely occupied with questions around spatiality and temporality, space travel, time travel, movement of some sort. This movement, often with the insertion of the insistence of newer technologies, if we're talking about certain literature or certain film and things, is a movement toward or against or beyond particular perimeters, right? Particular borders, if you will. And it seems to be about, those borders seem to be about delineating the possible and the impossible. So how does this apply to a proposed love project? It seems that with a lot of speculative text and with a lot of love projects, what we find embedded in the text is a certain type of planned obsolescence, is what I call an expected end to the thing. In a lot of cases, we see this through a cynical lens. In a lot of sort of earlier speculative work, we see it as an anticipation of I was thinking the other day about the year 2000. Prince has a song, 1999, that he did in the 80s, right? Where he's talking about partying in 1999, anticipating the turn of the millennium. I was thinking about the excited denizens of Oakland in Sunrise Space is the place, who were also anticipating the year 2000, right? And you have Sunrise reminding us that it's after the end of the world. You know, don't you know that yet? He also says we work on the other side of time, right? So he's anticipating as well. And then in our lives, right? You remember the Y2K scare. You know, we're anticipating year 2000, anticipating the end, you know, everything's going to crash, and here we are still, you know, getting along. So I think there's been a sort of post-millennial shift too, because we have passed the year 2000, and I think the next thing was 2012 that we were supposed to be afraid of, and here we are so far. There is a sort of danger in the air, and Greg referenced Toni Morrison. Now I was recently teaching Morrison's Beloved, where there are conversations about love, and Seth and Paul do talk about the danger of love, and how one is taught, or at least encouraged to love just a little bit, because we're so used to the loss, you know, that maybe if we love just a little bit, it won't hurt so much when the end comes. So, along with our interest in futurism, I think when it comes to Black speculative work, we're also greatly occupied with memory, sometimes with the trauma of memory. So the text, you know, when we do work like Greg's or like Nettie's, becomes a revisionist exercise to a certain extent, especially when it's about love, with regard to a Black love narrative. You know, here's the love. You know, I have love for you. Oh, I hate that phrase, I have love for you, because I always think about you, give it to me. You have love for me. And it's weird, there's a certain, there's a hesitancy there, right? I have love for you. I don't want to say I love you, I have love for you. And maybe I will share a bit of time. You know, there's a fear factor, right? I think it's a fear factor. Besides that, just general fear for expressing intimacy is masculine. Come back to that. So here's the love. You know, and the question becomes, okay, how do we protract that thing, right? How do we extend it? How do we make it visible across time and across space? You know, that's what the speculative project is about when it comes to Black love. How do we stretch it out instead of losing access to her mind and her music? Instead of losing access, how do we access it and maintain it? How do we access what I call the new intimacy formats, right? Formats in which we allow ourselves to be expectant, right? I think that's what a lot of this works about, utilizing the newer platforms. I hear that in Ned's work. I hear that in Greg's work, and I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. We did start a little bit late, so I'm going to allow 10 minutes over for Q&A or just feelings, responses. We're going to go ahead and open it up to the audience. Yes.
thank you for that improvisational moment, Greg. I was really kind of struck by the text as I was reading it aloud. How you combine those borders, both historic, taking historic text and then setting it in a speculative arena. And it was also futuristic in that, you know, the speculation that the currency of ideas and religion shifted to feminist discourse and the possibility of female leadership within this conversation of progress and blackness. And it was both reflective and, as I say, speculative, in that you use this archival text in a completely newly constructed way. I was just curious as to the origin of the concept for that. And is this, what's the broader arc, or is this a single scene, or can you talk to us more about what the work, the origin of the work and what the arc is?
Well, actually, that particular speech by King was brought to my attention by filmmaker Callaloo Smith, and she has a manifesto she argues for, inspired by that speech, an association for the advancement of creatively maladjusted cinema, and we were both struck by the echo with the organization that was started in Chicago in the 60s, the AACM. And she's actually been doing a lot of work in Chicago, and she found that none of the members of the AACM were actually aware of the fact that this acronym that they created, you know, had been preceded by King's speech. And so when this piece was performed first at a series Jason and Alicia Hall-Moran curated at the Whitney Museum called Bleed. And Jason actually played music by Muhal Richard Abrams, who founded the ACM, and by Roscoe Mitchell, another family member. And that piece, the piece by Muhal is actually a piece with vocals called How Are You? And that broaches on those ideas that I also found in Bob Marley's Could You Be Loved, and in the beginning, amazing beginning of Tony K. Bambar's novel, The Salt Eaters, which, Are You Sure You Want to Be Well? I was interested in that, what people looked at as the unbridgeable divide between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King over this question of violence, you know, as a solution to oppression, as a strategy for oppression. And I was interested in imagining the ways in which, in practice and in dialogue in their movements, that if they had both lived beyond the times of their demise and actually were able to engage in these conversations, how some synthesis might emerge in the conversation as they confronted actual conditions. So there's places in there where I allow for this slippage, where Malia is supposed to be Malcolm, Martine is supposed to be Martin, but there's places where I actually substitute the voice of one for the other. And that was really influenced by something King said after he had taken his family to spend a few weeks in the projects in Chicago. And he said that if I had started my movement in the North instead of the South, like even I would have had to reconsider nonviolence as a strategy, you know, and which really spoke to the notion that what is the greater violence, the destruction of the body or the destruction of the, you know, oppression of the psyche. And as well, one of the things that I found when I started working with the actors who worked on this piece in the production, was that there was no way to get around the kind of embedded masculinity, you know, kind of heroic black male masculinity of their voices if it was actually read as speech. So we actually, and with Jason, of course, being lyrical and mellifluous behind us, moved into this kind of song speech place that actually allowed them to really own the language and the intention of the language, and also to create their own kind of particular tension and friendship through sound. So as opposed to them being in opposition in ideas, they were actually creating this dialectic in music, in musicality. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, and the piece was really conceived with the idea that the music itself was the bridge and the connection that preachers, the different notion of a preacher's voice that they both had. And then also, one of the things, you know, when you actually look at both of their words transcribed to the page, you know, you're just struck by our incredible fortune to have two figures who were thinking that deeply and that committedly, not only about politics and strategy, but then about the notion that language is a transactional medium, as Jarima reminded us yesterday for this whole notion of love and revolutionary love.
Yes.
Thank you. And this is an incredible panel, and I think having the presence of science fiction with performance couldn't be any better. I want to propose love is always necessarily speculative. It's speculative when Socrates and Plato reflect in the symposium. It's speculative when Jesus at the Last Supper reflects on the nature of love. One of the ways that we know that it has to be speculative is because it's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish from a strictly grammatical point of view between statements that are injunction, that are statements of command, and statements of wish. Somebody sufficiently powerful, a wish becomes a command. Somebody who issues a command and the command cannot be enacted, it becomes tacitly a wish. And love, as it were, occupies. There is a demand for love and a command for love as well. And I want to suggest that one of the ways in which we might be able to link the speculative dimension to the science fiction, because someone whether it's like Ursula Le Guin, for example, even things as commonplace as The Matrix, I would say the question of love is at the absolute heart of the speculative nature of the science fiction genre in this respect, that it's about the nature of the ending. I mean, Nelly Rosario's brilliant reading, I think, was trying to capture this question about, well, what is the future? Well, the future is a way of thinking about what is the end. The future is the way of thinking about the end. And love, speculatively, is necessarily linked to the end, but in a way that's dangerous. The great book that captured this is Bonito Rougemont. He was one of the few Christians that the Surrealists admired. His book, Love in the Western World, essentially is an intellectual history sociology of the way in which love as eros undermines social stability, and thereby creates new kinds of narratives. And so I want to ask then, is surely all thinking on love, because we studiously avoid defining it, right? all thinking on love is necessarily speculative. The speculation, therefore, has to be about the future, and then paradoxically, it's about the nature of the end as well. So there is speculation built into love, even if it's eros, but necessarily if it's agape or philia as well. So speculation and love belong to each other as part of the very nature of what they are. I mean, I'd like to propose that as a response to what seems disparate, but I think is incredibly connected.
I would just add to that, of course, it's also about the relational consequences of how we act in the moment, and what our sense of responsibility or irresponsibility creates in those kind of fragile, tenuous, dangerous moments, emotional moments.
Any other panelists want to respond?
Is it not too about memory? How does,
Necessarily.
and would that be speculative? Because memory is always, it's
Yes, because memory has to be, memory is not given. So how we conceive of memory will be necessarily how we imagine the future of that memory. Otherwise, we don't have memory.
Thank you so much, James, for the panels. I really enjoyed the presentations. I guess I don't know if this is a complex question, but perhaps it comes out and becomes clear. Lene, with your piece, you actually brought up something that's been kind of absent in this conference, which is oddly what was the theme of our conference last year, is the question of translation, love and translation. And, with the word ifunyanya, this idea that, love is something that cannot be translated across in different languages and cultures, but also as that which is really infinitely translatable in the sense of, the look of your father. Or on the first night, one of the dancers was saying that we had a dance performance on the first night, and one of the dancers in the company said, I only speak English, but I really can speak any language in the world because I can, with a movement, someone can understand exactly what it is I'm saying no matter where I go. So I guess I would love to hear, and then I'm also reminded of that, the conversation we had last night, where there's this, in Amharic, there's a way that you, like a syllable that you add to the end of someone's name, which expresses endearment. And Dag was saying to me, so whenever I call him, Dag, he says, to respond to you appropriately, to recognize that kind of love, you have to, in your, what is that called? In the way that you address the person, the pronoun that you use to address the person, the you add on. Am I describing it correctly? Right. So, for myself, I think about the differences. For example, in Creole, we have this program which has all the words on it. In Creole, when you say leme is also a way for me to say, I love you so much, but then also leme itself also refers to having sex, right? And it can be, a type of, sex that is with absence of love as well. And then in the French, obviously, we had, Michael Stormicho, who was giving us these, and Sharon with l'amour fou. In French, you find that a lot of times, amour, there are all these different words, amour propre, self-love, amour fou, crazy, there are all these different adjectives that people attach to the word love. So I'm just wondering if, some of you could just reflect on this idea about love and translation, whether it's translation in a kind of literal sense, right, culturally, linguistically, or in different, or as it's informed by various, ideologies.
That's a lot. I think that, well, as you were talking, I was thinking about the idea of translation, and then also when in television and culture, for example, within Nigerian culture, you have certain ideas of love, and I think that love is, I think the definition of love varies depending on the culture, definitely, and it varies depending on the words that they use. For example, like I was saying, in Igbo culture, there is no direct translation of the idea of falling in love. There's no word for that. But people but I think the ideas of, I don't know how to describe this, it's very hard to explain. The younger generation knows that idea now, you know, whereas before, that because there was no direct translation of falling in love, it didn't exist. Like that idea of two people coming together, they fall in love, and they get married, it didn't exist until Western culture came. And so now the younger generation has that idea of falling in love, but it's something that is in English. It's something, the words are in English. So I think that when something doesn't exist, I don't know, when something doesn't exist within the culture, there needs to be a word for it in order for that concept to exist. And I think that makes the idea of love very complicated. And I think that with our shrinking world, and with not social networking, but what am I thinking? With technology and people being brought together more with social networking, with the internet, et cetera, I think these ideas are going to change. I think that the idea of love is going to shift, and I think that it's not going to rely solely on words within one language. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And so this whole idea that there are many concepts, many different concepts that are not translatable within each culture. But since we're talking about love, we'll stick with that. So this idea that each culture has its own concept of love, and that's through their words. I think that's definitely going to change with the future. And I think that and that's going to be due to language becoming something else. Because, for example, when people are speaking online, it's not always, there are ideas that are passed between people that are not within that language. For example, emoticons. I'm thinking of emoticons. You have the smiley face, and that means a lot. It's all within imagery. So, and the emoticon is something that is understood worldwide. You know, people see that and they understand it instantly. So that's something where language is not obsolete, but there's a translatable language across the board. So how will that affect, just the idea of love, for example? I think that the future will be different, and I think everything is going to rely directly on what can be translated and what can't be translated.
Nearly, do you really mean to say that if you don't have the word for it, it doesn't exist? Do you really mean to say that? That is to say, there are never experiences that are already seeking.
No, not across the board, but I think that language does define what we know. That language, not across the board, but sometimes yes. A lot of times, yes. Yeah.
I think that where it becomes tricky, so I guess this is in a little bit of a different context, but I do a lot of work on anti-violence work, right, sexual violence. And we have this conference in New York for students, and we talked about consent, the idea of consent and the way that the anti-rape movement is now being built around the notion of consent. And a lot of the students that we were working with, they really took us to task for it because they were talking about how, for example, if you think about students with disabilities, right, because we talk about consent as being verbal, right, so, how do you know whether or not someone is consenting? And the students were saying, well, what about, they're really talking to us, like, what do you do with students with disabilities? What if you can't express that, right? And so I think similarly, to your point, that if it's to say, if you don't have the literal physical word to say love, that doesn't mean that you haven't been able to experience, which I think is what you're getting at.
I mean, that is precisely what I'm saying. Otherwise, there is no tension. We are not, whether it be in the areas of, say, social justice, or areas of affect, or areas of taste, we've all been taught that, that we have poor taste, and we have new experiences, and new experiences then seek new forms of linguistic expression, or new forms of symbolic expression, like emoticons, for instance. These are just symbolic forms of expression that then take on a logic of their own, that then can give expression to things that afterwards we can say, well, there we did not have the right words for them. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's one-sided, but the idea that something does not exist if we do not have a language is a curious form of nominalism for me.
I wanted to maybe repeat something that Dorima said yesterday about unannounced love and the Western concept of always having to announce love, and how he buries atomically that love in his work and the characters. And for me, that the issue of atomic was an interesting choice, because I think for me the translation vision would be movement. I think that movement of energies, of bodies, of, you know, anything static, I think, does not share, does not emit, does not. So translation for me, I keep going back to the anatomy because it's, Calle 13 has a song that says, it's called Muévete, and it's actually with Fela Kuti's son. He does a collaboration. It's a beautiful song, but it's all about movement, move. If you can't move your body, move your ideas. And the whole song, I mean, it's like really good to work out to. So when you move, you cannot be inactive. You cannot not do. And so that would be for me the place. It's just the idea of motion. You know, it's the idea of physics. It's the idea. It's what light is. It's you know, high vibrations, but constantly being engaged physically in matter in that respect. So that's the translation for me. And sometimes words can express what we. I think words get in the way. You know, we send each other to make down telegrams, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. This is our last question, gentlemen.
I'm Corey.
I know, I was like, aren't you supposed to be done here?
You don't need me. I mean, it's just, rich. So I really have a question. The question, I'm wondering if science fiction is not a bit redundant.
Yeah.
Because
What do you mean by that?
both of them are forms of fiction. And is it an overemphasis as if we're actually moving somewhere else? I mean, the practices that y'all gave us today just brought to bear this idea that, look, I mean, we are all imaginary. I mean, this is really and truly this experiment, whether it be in whatever register, and that what's happening is we're still trying to think identity, and y'all are forcing us to think beyond identity, beyond an identitarian logic. And in many ways, we're still trying to figure out what it is that you're doing, but you're doing something else, even with the materials that we think we already know. I mean, the Igbo, Efunanya, I'm wondering if in the 16 dialects that we've been working on a Igbo translation project with Professor Chebe. He's dedicated the rest of everything he's doing to finishing this project. I'm wondering if that inability is not because we're looking for an identity. I mean, the inability to understand it is because we're looking for this identitarian core. We're looking for this straight, equal relationship. And it's actually refusing that sort of thought. It's refusing that line of thinking. Bringing together King and X and the ways in which you did forces us to begin to think that, look, these debates are always already with us. When Morrison does it in Song of Solomon with Guitar Milkman and the 7 days, there was a question of violence. I mean, there's always these questions, but how do we begin to think them not as these exact statics that give us either these exact opposites that we can then frame around and then think around categorically, but actually begin to break that categorical identitarian logic. And it seems to me that the only way we're able to do that is what you're doing here. And even with flattening love to the Western concept, we're talking about love in English. And you know what? There are many ways to understand love in English, but we have to understand the context in which this language is being being used, but we want to flatten it. We want to say, once we have the category, the category got us stuck, got us by the throat, and it's clogging up our thinking, and we're trying to break it. And I just want to ask, what's the process in which you're doing this? I mean, I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to, one, yes, when I'm talking about love, I'm talking about the Western idea. And there are many, of course, there are many different definitions. So when I say that there is no concept of love, or there's no direct translation of love in the Igbo language, I'm talking about the Western idea of love. That's what I want to specify that. And then also with the category of science fiction, that's something I've been battling against throughout my whole writing career. One of the Who Fears Death is categorized in different places as something else. You know, some say it's science fiction, some say it's fantasy. I say I don't care. I'm not really concerned with categories. I'm concerned with the ideas. I'm concerned with what I'm saying on the inside. If you look at the category of fantasy, for example, I'm drawing off of Igbo folklore and mythology and culture and spiritual beliefs. There are people in Igbo land who believe in a lot of the things that are considered just magic in my work. So does that make what I'm doing fantasy? Or, because fantasy is just, you know, stuff that you've made up and it's not real, or is that something else? So this whole idea of categories is something that I rail against, but at the same time, it's a way of describing something. It's simplifying, and I think we should all be fully aware of that. I think there is a category of science fiction, but once you hold a magnifying glass up to it, the borders kind of fall apart. And quite frankly, I wouldn't really worry about that. I'd be worried more about, I'm more interested in what these things are doing. Because once you start talking about categories at all, you're either talking about what publishers use in order to sell books and how they sell them and all that, or, and then once you start doing that, then you start kind of boxing things in and overly simplifying things, and once something is categorized as one thing, then you don't see all the other things that it is. So, yeah, categories, I think, are better just used by publishers and marketing tools, or if you just need to give an idea of what you're talking about, then I think that's the best one.
We've got to stop. We've got to stop. Please feel free to come down and approach the panelists directly. I have a very important announcement to make. Right here at 5 o'clock p.m. tonight, a very stellar lineup of amazing writers. In addition to closing statements and final remarks, please come. Seems like it will be a very festive occasion. Thank you. Last round of applause for our panelists. Also to Chloe Walker, our satellite part of our respondent panel. Have a wonderful afternoon.